the channel here on Crappie, and we've had a lot of fun the last couple of weeks. Been fishing tournaments. We fished on No Land 3 weeks ago, and never been on that lake. Had a big time and ended up placing third. And then the next week fished on Dale, and I have got to do a little bit of fishing on Dale, and it had changed up quite a bit from what we had saw in August and July, but we were still able to get on some fish, and we ended up placing second there. And I hadn't got to do a whole lot of filming. Normally, I spend a lot of time on the water, but between guide trips and then the tournaments, I hadn't really got to dedicate a whole lot of time to, sitting down and making videos. So what I was able to do this week for the videos, I'm just going to go through the differences in casting and jigging, and kind of when to cast and when to jig. And before we get into the footage, I wanted to show you the setup. So whenever I'm casting, which with using the live scope, I like using braid. I can use them on a filament or even a fluorocarbon. It's a little different. You can't find your line as quick, but there's times whenever I will use that. But I think a lot of the clips today you'll see the braided line. But go with just an 1/8 ounce jig head, and you can just kind of flip that out there. The 1/8 ounce, it's heavy enough that you can get pretty good casting distance with it, and it sinks really fast, so you can get down to those deeper fish. If you're fishing, shallower water, or your fish are setting up higher in the water column, you'll definitely want to go to a 1/16 or even to a 1/32 ounce. Of course, in windy conditions, as a lot of times we end up finding ourselves fishing in those, with that 1/32 ounce, it's hard to cast into the wind, and if you get a crosswind, it'll be hard to get it to go straight. In the last, which we've been for both tournaments, I think primarily casted. I think I did catch some fish vertical jigging on No Land, but it was I don't know that we weighed any of them. I did catch some vertical jigging, but most of them we were casting. And our biggest reason for casting is because as we move in closer to these fish, we're seeing a lot of the bigger fish kind of go out the backside, or will leave the pile. So we feel like that if we can set back off of it, we have a much higher percentage of those bigger fish staying around. And the same thing with Del Hollow last week. We felt like just staying back off of the fish was definitely beneficiary to us. And one of the things that I'll do is, if I'm needing to fish with a smaller profile, is like a 1/32 ounce jig head, is I'll take a 1/16 ounce bullet weight, and I will peg that up above, and that'll help you to cast it out further. And it also, in deeper water, it will get down to those fish. But you still run into the same problems. If you're fishing, say 12 foot of water, and your fish are setting in 6 foot, that 1/16 ounce is going to cause that bait to get down in amongst those fish. So there's different techniques and different little tricks you can use. You can also use a floater for those higher up fish. Haven't done a lot of floater fishing. I've been very successful without using a floater, but if there was a situation that I could think of where that would definitely be beneficiary, would be in that circumstance. And then the other style of fishing, other than casting, is the vertical jigging. And I like to use either, this here is a 14-foot rod, and this is for, I guess, more of a power technique. I will use a bait cast reel, and that way I can, because I drive the boat with a remote control, so I can let line out, and I can even take line in just using this bait cast reel. And with the 14-foot, you're able to get away from the boat, which where we stand usually puts you about 10 feet off. I know if once I get to chasing these fish in the winter, once the water cools down, I will probably move my live scope to where it's sideways, and I'll probably stand on the front of the boat just to maximize the reach with this. But you can feel a lot with this 14-footer, but it's not going to balance out like the 10-footer will. I mean, as you can see right here is the balance point on a 14-footer, and I'm not going to hold right there. I'll be back here letting the weight of the rod set against my forearm. But for vertical jigging, sometimes you vertical jig because the fish get extremely tight-lipped. And I saw that this in the summer, and was able to be really successful in a late summer tournament. We ended up winning, and even the state tournament that we won over at Taylorsville in May. What had happened was these fish had kind of become lethargic in a way, and they would not chase bait. So, of course, I love to cast. You can stay off of the fish, but when that bait would come past them, they might look at it, but you wasn't getting a bite. So what I was able to do, and then with the 14-footer, the fish would come up, and they might just touch it, but because of the length of the rod, you know, the longer the rod, the more any little movement's going to cause that tip to move, and I couldn't hardly feel the bite. So you go down to a 10-footer, and with this 10-footer, I'm able to, your balance point is going to be right there. So I can take this 10-footer, I can hold it like that, and then it is, I'm in a garage, so you can't see, but I'm able to hold that pole extremely still. And then a lot of times, because what I'm running is I'm running a 1/2 ounce sinker above either a 1/32 or a 1/16 ounce jig head. I will go to a 1/8, especially if they're biting it, just because with that 1/8, a lot of times you get a bigger, stronger hook, and you know the bait is going to stay below the egg sinker better. But most of the time, whenever I have to go to this, if I'm using an 8, if they're biting an 8, I can use the longer pole, because if they're biting an 8, a lot of times they're more aggressive towards it, and you can use the bigger pole. But say with this setup here, you have a 1/2 ounce egg sinker above a 1/32 ounce jig head, and then you're just holding it. And what you'll do is you can just hold it right in front of those fish until they bite it, and then once they bite it, you just set the hook. You can feel a whole lot with this. But I'm going to talk through these clips. I've got several throughout the year, and just discuss, you know, why we were using a casting technique versus the jigging technique, and go through it.
So this first clip here, this January of early this year, and as you can see, water temperature there at 38 degrees, and these fish just, I mean, they're not moving real fast. This cold water's got them moving kind of slow, and you can see we're just straight pole jigging. I'm using the 1/2 ounce egg sinker, and then there's a fluorocarbon leader. As you can see, the line doesn't show up. What I'm doing is I'm just easing up over top of these fish, and if the water was, say, 70 degrees, and this being Lake Cumberland, you wouldn't be able to do that. The water would be too clear, they would spook off. But on this particular day here, with the water temperatures the way they is, no, you know, those fish, they just don't, and it had a little color to it. They'd had some rain, but you see, I'm just putting this bait right over top of them, and which there I'm using a 13-foot pole, so it's still the same concept as you would the 14-foot. But, and there it is, it eats it. But you see, I use that live scope just to pan left and right. And this is another clip from that same day. This is actually the only fish we caught out of that brush pile. But as you see, once again, which with the water clarity being a little bit dingier, and just that overall 38 degree water temp, those fish are going to be a lot less active. You see, come in there and choke down on it. So, and it's also with I think the jigging the fish is a lot easier, because you know you you've got your live scope. If you're live scoping, I mean, you may be doing something different, but it's just easier to be able to keep it in the strike zone. And where I was talking about there in the intro, you see this fish coming. In the intro, I was talking about the fish that we had caught for the state tournament. They didn't want that bait moving any, and this is still pretty much similar bite to that. And you seen there, and this same day. So you've got several fish there, and you could pitch out there to them, and you catch a few, but you wasn't catching a lot because they were not coming to the bait if it was moving at a horizontal. You see there my wife getting hooked up. Another reason why you would use jigging as to casting would be if you have somebody that's, and you can even take live scope out of the picture, but if you just have somebody new to live scope, it's a whole lot easier to show them everything using this type of technique, where it's like you just take your pole, stick it in front of the transducer, and then let your line down. So it's, it'd be a time of when to use it is if you're working with somebody who's maybe not as experienced of an angler as you. But as you can see, those fish, they're just kind of coming up and smelling of it there, which I'm being a little funny. I've actually got 2 poles in this clip, and I'm fishing with both of them, and then I'm actually just steering it with my foot. But you can see these fish are just holding real tight, and as these baits are kind of coming over, they they're just not attacking. That's something you have to pick up on just from looking at the fish, and it usually doesn't take very long. I like to start out casting to these fish most of the time, just because I feel like you got a less chance of spooking them, and that's kind of how it was. And this here, you see the water temperature is up to 83, so it's not like it was in early winter where the water was 38 degrees. But it seems like what I saw this year, and I'll just speak to this year, is I had water. Sometimes it seemed like water between 80 and 86 degrees. I had a hard time getting in a bite. I actually this year was very successful with water temps above 86 degrees. I don't know why. I didn't see it a lot, but a couple days we had really high water temps above 86 degrees, and I was able to get fish to bite. But here we've got 83 degrees. I'd already tried casting. I caught a few. There he is. I'd caught a few, and they just weren't. They just another one of those days. They just wasn't wanting the bait coming horizontal. They wanted to look at it setting up above them. As you seen as that one, I had that bait presented there to those fish for quite some time. And with vertical jigging, even if you don't have live scope, maybe you just have 2D sonar, and that's how I started out fishing, was just with 2D sonar. You're still able to use the same concept. You use the 2D sonar to find the structure, and then it's right there. So you'll just lower your bait right to it, and it's a good way to be able to stay right in the target zone. And that's pretty good fish there, and just vertical jigging in summer. And coming into this next clip here, I was in Texas, and not really the water clarity wasn't the best, but you'll see I present this bait to these fish for an extended period of time. Of course, see with and another thing that don't want to fail to mention is there was a pretty good breeze going, and you don't really see the water having that much chop on it, but it was just a constant in your face wind. So with the vertical jigging, what you're able to do a lot of times is just, and you see there's that fish is, you're able to keep that bait in the strike zone longer than you are whenever you're just either casting out to it or or even if you're using a bobber, especially on a windy day with a bobber, it's gonna carry it. So you watch this clip here. Now, if I'd have casted to this fish, which another thing you can think about is that fish is down 16 feet. We're in 24 foot of water, and that is in 16 feet. And this isn't a brush pile. This is just one single fish on vertical structure. And not that I can't cast and hit that fish in the head, because I have before, but this here, I could have put it in front of it and it goes past it. Look how many times, look how long this bait is around this fish before this fish shows any, it doesn't pay it a bit of attention. So we're going to make another pass at it, and it just the sheer amount of how much time it would have took. So you could pitch at that fish and say you present it once and it doesn't bite. Well, it could take you 10 seconds to get that bait down there to it, and that's if you make a good pitch. So as many times as we actually presented to that fish there, he finally decided to eat there. But it's just another reason to vertical jig. I don't think personally that either one is better than the other. I'm not going to sit up here and say, you're going to catch a lot more fish vertical jigging as opposed to casting, or you're going to catch a lot bigger fish casting as opposed to vertical jigging. I know everybody has their preference. And this here, you can see where I cast into some crappie. This is in Texas on the vertical timber. You can see my bait coming down there, approaching these fish. You're about to see I'm going to get one of them's attention here. And I got him. Alright, now. See? It's the wrong species. I need just the wrong species, but it still plays into the whole thing of what I was seeing that day. And I did catch, on this particular day, I did catch some black crappie in a brush pile, and didn't catch a whole lot of them. I definitely had the better bite off of the standing timber as opposed to the brush piles, but I was able to just be more successful using the vertical jigging, and really I don't know, Louisiana, which this is a video in Texas, but Louisiana was different. I had success both ways. I had success casting to them, and I had success vertical jigging, but I wasn't able to figure out the exact right pattern to be successful. I caught good fish all week, and it was, a lot of the fish that I was seeing were spooking off. That was one of the reasons why I transitioned to casting, which the water clarity was at a bare minimum there, and it was actually in D'Arbonne. The water clarity was a lot better than what it was in the Red River. But even with the Red River, we ended up going to casting just because we just become so much more successful about not spooking the fish, or the fish feeling the presence of the boat. But that is definitely, vertical jigging is definitely a proven method, and I don't know, I'm not gonna say that one's my favorite over the other. Right now, I'm kind of in a big casting mood right now. That's what we've done the last 2 weeks, is cast to them, and been very successful. I mean, as far as just on the boat management, I like the casting a little bit better, because we're using 6.5 and 7 foot rods, and it doesn't take up nearly as much of the front deck as it does with the 14 foot rod. But it's whatever's going to catch fish that day. That's definitely what I want to do. And you can see here, this is just a beautiful Texas crappie, and that one there, it ended up being just shy of 2 pounds. but definitely a lot of fun. Now let's talk about casting. So you see here, this is an early spring. We had moved from, water temperatures being colder to now we're looking at 58 degrees water temperatures. And you can see these fish there. These are pre-spawn and spawning fish, and they are sitting on top of the brush. If fish are up on top of the brush, that usually means that they are, looking to feed. If they're setting up on top, you can pitch that jig out just like I did here, out either past the brush pile or make sure that you're above the brush pile, and you can stay up in the water column and catch these fish. And especially earlier in the spring, this year we were using curly tails and having a lot of success. And I think even here's another example. You can see those fish sitting on top of the brush pile and coming out to eat. And as long as those fish are up there, and sometimes, yesterday I was on Cumberland and I was pitching to them, but we were actually catching them down in the brush. One of the reasons though why we don't a lot of times vertical jig on Cumberland and Dale as much, just because it's so clear. And that's, water clarity can play a big role into what you're doing. The clearer the water, it's going to be easier for those fish to find that bait. Seen crappie come as much as 15 feet to get a jig before in good clear water. And here's another clip. You can see these fish up high in the water column, and my bait's there at 26 feet moving. I'm just going to bring it right over top. And like I said, it's curly tail, and so it's giving some action. Of course, this is just post spawn. I think he actually bit it once, come off, and I was able to get him again. And still on the same piece of structure. You seen the last clip, there was 2 fish. Now there's only 1, and got my bait there at 24 feet, and just bringing it across the top. And here he comes. And I think the signature was definitely a lot better than the fish. Don't know. He was awful swelled up. Same pile once again, just casting, and you see the difference in the water temperature, but we're still under that 80 degree mark. And you can't just say, the water temp's 82 degrees, I'm going to have to vertical jig, or the water's 65 degrees, I'm going to have to cast. You got to play around with it to see what the fish want that day. I have been on the water and, the day before be casting, and then the next day it's just vertical jig, or vice versa. A lot of times, usually you'll do the same thing for the week or 2 weeks, but it can change in one day. You just always, don't get locked in to one thing. Here we are. We had vertical jigged these fish a week or 2 prior on Dale Hollow, and then this day we went out and we were just casting to them and being very successful, because we could stay a little bit off the pile. We're a little bit closer there than what we would normally want to, but just the action of the fall and getting that horizontal, a little bit of a horizontal move is just what those fish liked. But thanks for watching. If you have any questions, leave comments, and we'll see you on the water.
That's Jason. That's Jason. I can. Oh, give me next one. I should have boat flipped him. Yeah. Oh, he just barely. All right, watch out. You pick up a bait. Thank you. Couldn't find the net. Oh. That ain't bad.